Welcome to the SubSummit podcast. Real conversations with the operators scaling subscription, membership, and recurring revenue in today's commerce landscape.
All right, nice guy community. So check this out. If you've ever run a business, you know that there are plenty of ways to lose money, and most of them show up long after you thought that you made the sale. Our guest today looked at the problem and decided that there had to be a better way. Scott Adams is the CEO of Deflect, a company helping businesses stay ahead of the disputes, protect their revenue, and spend less time putting out fires. And as an entrepreneur and problem solver, Scott has built a business around helping other businesses keep more of what they earn. So today we're going to talk about innovation, leadership, customer trust, and what it takes to build a company that solves a problem people actually have. Scott, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me on, Doug.
Yeah, man. So we first met at the SubSummit conference back in May of 2026. Your message was great. And unfortunately, we had the technical snafu. So what ended up happening was I benefit because now I get to have another conversation with you. But I love the fact that we're bringing this out to the nice guy community because you discovered a problem. You saw a problem, and not many were doing the sleuthing and the problem solving. So why don't we talk about the problem that you saw, and then we'll talk about how the solution came together. What did you see as the initial problem?
Really, I guess it kind of depends when you look at it. But at least this iteration of things with Deflect was I built a company before, sold it to Count and Equifax around the same problem, and it was basically about when as a merchant, if you get a chargeback, right? The consumer calls in, they say they didn't do it, whatever it might be, they don't recognize it. It doesn't really matter. In the end, in most cases, that becomes a chargeback. As a merchant, you lose money. And you get fined. You can have the ability or the possibility of losing your merchant account, which is terrible. And that's kind of how I got into this now, but also like 25 years ago when I started. Right, I was a merchant. I was on the IT side, had no idea what a chargeback was, and all of a sudden, we made some changes to our business model. The business took off. It was doing great, but we got literally these crates of chargebacks. Like back 25 years ago, it wasn't digital. You would literally get the mailman coming with his truck because he had 4 or 5 boxes of affidavits, basically.
Wow.
Where the consumer is claiming that, you defrauded him. And we had to go through all those, deal with them. And so I had to figure out what a chargeback was and how to deal with that. And now, there's been a lot of businesses over the years that have worked on this. Visa, MasterCard have some solutions around it. But the problem is that if you don't understand them, especially as a merchant, you really can't make them work. Chargebacks are tough, right? And the thresholds are tiny. It's like, I remember back when I started in this, it's like thinking, okay, why 1%? 1% used to be the number. You had to stay under 1%. That's such a little number. Who cares? Right? As a merchant, I was happy with 1% or 2%.
Right.
And so that's, the bigger problem is that the merchant has to be held to such a small, low threshold. And that's what my co-founder and I started Deflect around, was to bring solutions together and create our own solutions that help the merchant not only beat those chargebacks, but ideally save the sale before it even gets to that point.
So let's get a little bit even elementary, if we could, for just a second. What is a chargeback, and why do they happen? As a guy that doesn't have a huge subscription business, but a subscription business where we have about 70 or so clients that are in there, we very rarely get a chargeback. We know all of our clients by first name for the most part, and we very rarely have somebody, and they'll call us before. But what is a chargeback, and what percentage of business typically would be charged back to the merchant?
Yeah. So basically what it is think about it from the consumer point of view, right? So you're a consumer, you have a credit card, right? All people in the United States, at least, probably have a card.
Mm-hmm.
You go online, you buy something, or you go to the store and buy something. You put it on your Visa, your MasterCard, Amex, Discover, whatever. But then, maybe you open up your app and you see a transaction and you don't remember doing it, or maybe it is fraud. There are definitely fraudsters out there.
Mm-hmm.
So you see a transaction you don't recognize. So you then pick up the app and hit dispute, or you call the bank, call your issuer and say, I don't know what this is. That turns into a chargeback in most cases. Like if you have no other defense, like Fraud Deflect, then that turns into a chargeback. And now on the merchant side, what happens is that you just get an email and that money is immediately taken out of your account. So, if it was a charge for $20 or a charge for $100 or $1,000, doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
That's immediately removed from your bank account. So you lose the cash flow. And then you get the choice. Like, if it gets to that point, then you can also represent that, meaning you can basically fight it. But then the burden of truth is on you. You have to get all the evidence. You have to submit it. And then unfortunately, then the issuer decides. So the issuer, who's really their client, is the consumer, not you.
Right.
They get to decide, is this enough evidence that they will go against their customer and give you your money back as a merchant?
It sounds like most chargebacks probably aren't fraud, though. So help me with the name for a second. Why isn't it called Chargeback Deflect instead of Fraud Deflect?
Yeah. So, it's funny, like it's probably a good 20 years ago, like people in the industry, we were kind of trying to come up with what is this, right? Because so much of fraud isn't fraud. Yeah, absolutely. Some of it is, right? There are stolen credit cards, there's card scanners, scammers, or scanners that, steal your card number, or you get them online. It's not hard to buy them, actually, stolen cards. But really, that's not that hard to stop. What's hard to stop is what we now call friendly fraud or first party misuse fraud.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where, let's say, like I say, it's legitimate that you don't recognize it, possibly. Or maybe you as a consumer actually want to scam the merchant. Or maybe, you've had a bad month, you lost your job, you can't pay your credit card bill. But hey, you can charge this back and you don't have to pay it, at least for a while, right? It could just be a strategy, right?
Mm-hmm.
I like to assume everybody's good, but things happen. So, but that, as far as the merchant is concerned, because a credit card company flags it as fraud, is fraud, right? It looks like a chargeback like any other chargeback because the consumer said they didn't recognize it. Now, it could also be they didn't recognize it somewhat legitimately. Like, let's say one of the companies I used to work at was Riot Games. Then I also consulted for Epic Games. So I'll use Epic because most people know it, between all the media that has happened. And if you don't know that name, but this also proves the point, Fortnite, right? If you've seen a kid, Fortnite. It's all over the place. Whenever I started helping Epic, the descriptor, what it said on the credit card statement, it was Epic Games. Now, this is 10 plus years ago.
Yeah.
Nobody knew who that was. So, I always said, do you sit around with your kids at dinner table and they're saying, oh yeah, I'm playing Fortnite, this is my character and all this. Then you say, yeah, but who makes that game? Yeah. You're never going to hear the name Epic Games.
Right.
And so you call in a month later, you get your bank statement, or you decide to look at your app. You don't know what that $10 charge is in Epic Games. Maybe there's 10 of them because you told your kid he could do it once. He did it 9 more times.
Mm-hmm.
And, again, he was probably just innocent, just hit the button again. But still, you call that fraud. You have no idea. So that becomes friendly fraud. As merchants, we're dinged not only for each of those $10 charges, we also get our fine, as much as $25 or $30 by our processor. Plus, if more than nowadays 1.5% of those against your transaction volume. Plus, there's another category of fraud here that doesn't work quite like a chargeback, but similar thing where the bank flags the transaction as fraudulent. Add those together, if it's more than 1.5%, you can lose your ability to process credit cards.
So
it could be even more.
Is it something like the subprime market in the mortgage business? The more chargebacks or fraud cases that you have, they look at you a little bit differently, or they put a little bit more scrutiny into every charge that is placed on your merchant account?
So that happens, definitely. You end up getting a lower authorization rate. You also, like I said, there's fines that may be more than the transaction.
Wow.
Plus, like I also said, right, plus your processor looks at you. And they're banks, basically, right? They're evaluating risk. So the more of these things you have, the riskier you are, right? They could lose money if you go out of business. So it becomes kind of a catch-22. You got to fix this problem. But then how do you fix it, right? How do you get ahead of that?
When you solved this problem initially, how did you realize or come to realize between you and your partner that this is a problem worth solving? And then not only is it a problem worth solving, but it's a problem that's worth solving and has some profit on the back end as well. Just talk to me as a business owner for a second, not as someone that actually understands the algorithm or the formula for putting this together.
Yeah, so really it's like any other problem. Like I said earlier, so I'm an engineer by training. Um, I thought I was going to code in a basement all the time and for my whole life and be happy. And, I might have been, right? I like to code. But I quickly realized that a lot of this stuff in the merchant world, most of the stuff isn't explained, right? You sign up for a merchant account. They don't tell you these things. They don't go over stuff. Maybe they should, maybe they shouldn't, but they don't.
Right.
It's kind of like signing a mortgage, right? What did you agree to? There's 30 pages you decide.
Totally.
I didn't read them all.
30, there's 300, and you look at it just like the end user agreement on a piece of software or the credit card agreement that you're signing. Basically, you're acknowledging I'm scrolling through 30 pages just to get that little checkbox at the end of the agreement.
Exactly. And, after I was a merchant, I consulted for a while, and that's what I've ended up doing. I'll consult for, a year or something. And in this case, I was doing it with my co-founder, who happens to be my wife as well. And she's also from the space and from video games and things. And we just kept coming back. Okay, what problems do the merchants need us to solve? And every single merchant, I swear, did not understand chargebacks, not as well as we do, at least. Right. And they had no idea how to fix it. If they fixed it, it was with a legacy competitor that one of those that they don't really fully understand what's going on, and they use antiquated methods in general. And so we saw all these new things coming. Plus, my previous company had dealt with these things, which made us already really good at it. And so we kept seeing this coming up. But then the merchants started asking us. They literally said, "Well, so why don't you do this?" Yeah, I don't really want to play specifically in that space. And
right.
And then but then what happened was that Visa and MasterCard both brought out a new product that kind of pushed us a little further to this is the next evolution. And it kind of pointed me, at least, as vision-wise, where the world's going. Right nowadays, what it seems like to me is that the card brands want merchants to focus on fully frauding and stopping it, and not doing it just with a product called an alert that does a refund. Mm-hmm. Like we offer those, and it does prevent a chargeback, but it kind of covers up the problem. And it put us, like I said, I've been doing this for 25 years, so I didn't have those tools when I had to solve these problems for my first company. So I know how to do it. And now you layer in the other tools that exist and the things we can now create with all the different things out there, like AI and all the data that's available out there. It just made perfect sense that we can solve this problem better than anybody else. And we can do it from the merchant perspective because we've been merchants. And that's even true of most of our executive team. We've been merchants. We understand your problems and thus, can help you solve them. And we're probably the best in the industry at it because of that.
Talk to our entrepreneur community, because there's a difference between taking ownership of solving the problem and then the business of taking ownership and solving the problem. The gift that you guys have is you found a spot that needed to be, white space that could be filled, but you still have to run the business, meaning you still have to be a merchant yourself or a vendor yourself. You still have an accounting department, you have the customer support, you have to have all of the things. Sure. When it came to those other components of running your business, what's some of the stuff that you were challenged by outside of you solving the problem for your clients?
I'll say a couple things there. Just one, I was really lucky early in my career, that first merchant business, that I had a good mentor, right? So I basically worked my way through a company, learning how to build a company, learning how to run all those departments. So that was super helpful in getting things going.
Sure.
So I already know how to do it. But I'll tell you one of the biggest challenges, I'd say probably two big ones. One, coming from the merchant world, I used to be able to literally walk into any conference and speak. Like there was no paying to speak. There was no really applying. I could literally walk in and I'd be able to get on stage, being a known speaker in the space. The moment I became a vendor, that changed. I was not ready for that. I was not ready to pay. I was not ready to pay a lot more to go. Like, SubSummit won't say the actual numbers, but it was not inexpensive to have a booth and to be on the stage.
Right.
And that's what I had not done before. Right. And so just learning how do you do all that. Like I can sell my product. It's a good product. It's got a solution, right? But figuring out that side of the business was very interesting. This, not as much with this business. I've done this before, but a couple businesses back, learning how to do that. And then one of the things with this business and with businesses, I think in the space too, is just things like, how do you figure out like what businesses and like the cash flow behind them, right? Because we're dealing with e-commerce. There's a lot of moving pieces, right? And so figuring out like, what this business needs monthly, this one needs weekly, these as our clients. And, so figuring out just how to navigate those kind of things can definitely a challenge. So having good accounting and software behind it is super helpful. I think one of the other challenges too is just like any business, right? Keeping your customers happy, right? I'll say, I think we have super high ratings around, if the clients like us, we do our job and get it done. We got a lot of great, CX people, but it's not all in our control, right? If, one, does the merchant listen? Does the client listen? Right? If we suggest they do something and they don't want to do it, I don't know that we can help, right? But then on top of that, regulations change, right? So as the regulation changes, it then changes the whole ecosystem. And so like in this case, for example, we lost a few merchants because the banks just decided all of a sudden, because of Visa's new VAMP program, they were going to terminate thousands of merchants from some of their portfolios. And so nothing you can do about that. And, so it's like, it's interesting, right? You have to be thinking about what's coming. You have to watch that landscape, but it's such a broad landscape. You got to watch the regulations. You have to watch new laws. Like, there's a new, the Federal Trade Commission is coming out with some new rulings probably around how subscriptions can be canceled, for example, or the data integrity, data privacy laws. We're a fraud company. We have to have data. And so you have to worry about those things. So I think it's like any business. There's always something you have to worry about.
Right.
It's never easy. And, being an entrepreneur is not something for the faint of heart. And you really have to love it, which happens to be that I do.
With technology being as prevalent as it is and fintech being, such a huge go-to these days, how do you work with, or maybe you don't, but if you do, I'd love to hear your perspective on it. How do you work with the big boys like the PayPals and the Stripes and the Visas and MasterCards and even some of the smaller companies that are out there that have their own type of financing program, the Klarnas and those types of companies? How do you work with them?
Well, so Visa and MasterCard were set up for them and Amex Discover because they're credit cards and they actually, some of the tools we use, they own. They're hard to use without a lot of expertise and engineering and data. And so we get some of that from them directly. So that's just pretty easy. PayPal's different. They have their wallet. They have different payment methods within PayPal, but we're actually one of the few providers out there that we have the ability, we have APIs into PayPal. And so we can actually pretty much do the same things we do for credit cards for PayPal. Klarna and a lot of those guys, right now, we don't really work with them. Although I'm sure we could. If they want to work with us, we'd be happy to talk. And the same thing with like other brands that are foreign, like, for example, like say in South America, they have Elo. We don't currently work with them, but we'd love to. So it really just depends. If they have a similar mechanism to a chargeback and how they want to resolve those disputes, the consumer disputes, those other things like Pix, right? In Brazil, we don't really have a good way to work with it, but it's something we're exploring because it's a very popular payment method. And that's the same for other countries. Like as clients come to us saying, hey, we accept this method, then we talk about it. Okay, show me the API, show me their system. Let's see how we can figure it out. And maybe that's one of the beauties of being an engineer first and then learning to run businesses, is that I tend to think about, okay, so we could do it. Just what's it going to cost and how's it going to work?
Cybersecurity is a term that people are so focused on nowadays. So technology as it is, it's so much easier to, not that I know about how to do any of these things, but hacking into somebody's computer is a lot easier today than it was, even 5 or more years ago. How do you stay current with the current cybersecurity technologies that you need in order to keep your company afloat? Because I'm assuming that you've got to be as locked up and tight as anybody else, because you're dealing with people's finances.
Yeah, luckily because of the type of systems we work with, we don't actually have a lot of data that is, like we don't have social security numbers, we don't have full credit cards, things like that. But yeah, we definitely need to keep our data secure. And that's what I rely on my head of engineering to keep up a lot of that stuff. But on top of that too, like you and I met at SubSummit. I still think one of the best ways to learn and to stay on top of industry trends and new things are going to events, right? Like, it's like I was at SubSummit, I go to a bunch of other industry events, ideally to speak and to work with merchants, but I'm also there to learn. Also just networking with peers, right? What do my peers use to keep their sites secure? And these kind of things. And so it's definitely hard, but there's definitely resources to different events to go to and that kind of stuff to figure it out.
What type of opportunities are you looking for as you look down the road, again, based upon what technology is doing in AI and so many different avenues that you can pursue? How do you know what opportunities to look for when it comes to putting Fraud Deflect ahead of the wave?
Part of it is just listening, right? I was literally just saying this to my team, is that, when you're talking to a client, a merchant, anybody, literally, be quiet, listen, right? See what they say, see what they tell you. They'll likely tell you their problems, so listen to the problem, see what comes up. But then also, kind of in a way back to staying connected, right? Being in person, ideally with people that are in the industry and learning what they're talking about, seeing what they're doing. And then, think about what's next, right? Like, for us, one of the biggest things for us was that, to me, like, we always talk about this, right? And just as humans, and that history repeats itself, right? The world tends to move in cycles.
Mm-hmm.
And it just happened like with this business. Visa brought out this program, like I said, VAMP, which it's an advancement in some ways, but in a lot of ways it makes us go backwards, right? Because my interpretation, this is not a quote from Visa, is that what they want us to do as merchants is to figure out, how do we stop things like friendly fraud, and not just by doing refunds. They want us to actually put more emphasis on pre-authorization, early post-auth, looking at our data and taking responsibility for it. And that's just so happens, going back 25 years, what I had to do before all these tools existed. And so, it kind of comes full circle. And I think that really always happens, right? Things advance, but you can probably apply things from the past to the future.
No doubt.
And that's kind of how I look at it. That's how all my businesses have worked, is just applying knowledge and experience from the past to the things that are coming. And then just understanding through all that experience, okay, this makes sense, right? The only way to really stop fraud is to actually stop fraud, is to put tools in place, to put metrics, watch that data before it becomes a transaction, and then quickly right after.
Before we go, I want you to share with our Nice Guy community. I'm curious. You mentioned a couple of times the fact that your wife was either a co-founder or partner in the business.
Co-founder.
So talk about the balance of life. Around the dining room table. Are you talking business? Are you talking family stuff? Are you talking a little of both? How do you find balance? I know that there's many people in our community that have their partnership in their spouse as well in their business. So talk about that.
Yeah, I think to me, it's almost the same thing. Like I would tell somebody about a marriage, right? It's communication. You have to communicate. You have to clearly define roles. But we did found it together, and we're definitely equal partners in this thing. And so we definitely talk about it a lot. But we also have to set boundaries, right? We have to say, you know what, today at in the evening we're not going to talk about it. Or this weekend we're taking it off, but that means actually not working. It's like as a CEO, I can't completely turn off, but I trust my team, and so and then that's also, I think, key. I think early days it's a lot harder, but as you start to build out the team of the company, then it's easier to do, because then you can define roles that are outside of the two of you. One thing that helped us a lot, I'd say two things, was one, we had worked together in the past.
Mm-hmm.
So we already knew how to work together. And, the other thing I'd say is that it's, maybe this sounds funny and a little bit counter to what you said, is that something she always tells me, she says, well, I knew what I was getting into, right? She knew I was a workaholic. She knew I was an entrepreneur. And the same with her, right? I knew she was a workaholic, and that helps, right? Understanding. And also understanding, like when you go into an event, it's not just, you're not going to play. It might look like I'm out there at parties all the time, but it's work and it's hard.
No doubt.
But she knows that because she's also done them too.
Yeah.
So I think it really comes down to clear communication. And like I said, defining roles help a lot, and just setting boundaries, making sure you have time for yourself and time for yourself, you as a couple, that you're not just working.
And talk to the new entrepreneur that might be listening to this. They're just establishing their business and just trying to think about the idea that they're going to explore, or even better, the problem that they are solving. Provide some advice. You've been doing this in the entrepreneurship game for a long time. What advice would you provide to a blossoming entrepreneur before they get rolling?
Yeah, something that's worked really well for me is being able to create the product, right? Being an engineer. Now, there's a lot of ways nowadays with the vibe coding with AI and stuff, which I don't particularly love. Just scares me a bit still, and security, all those things. But it does provide you a way to build a safe prototype, right? I would build something, say, that's barely covers what you want to solve. Get it 70% there and show it to people, right? Get feedback. Don't create something nobody wants.
Yeah.
Right. I always say, it's been a thing of forever in the entrepreneurial world or business world is, find a problem, fix a problem. So find a problem, figure out your solution, and then show it to people. Because I'll say one thing, like my last company, very similar to this one in a way, is that we were the first to integrate with the predecessor to something we do now. It's called BNPI, Visa's Merchant Purchase Inquiry. And I had it all working as an API. I took it to a conference in person, which is a great place to check out ideas, right? I told people about it. They said, "Oh, we love it. We'd love to do this." And I said, "Okay, well, how do we get going?" I was super excited. And they said, "Oh, yeah, well, it's going to take 6 to 9 months at least just to go on the roadmap."
Right.
So what do you mean? And I said, "Well, you said it's an API." I said, "Yeah, I have an API from Visa. I'm basically passing it through to you." They said, "Well, 6 to 9 months, maybe more, to get most companies to even think about doing an integration. Someone you to pay for it." It's like, okay, that's not what I wanted to build. So I went back to the drawing board, created a nice user interface for it. And the biggest thing, we needed data for the product to work. That's why the APIs. And I built a way for, we could take data any way they want. I'll teach you how to do an FTP. You could upload data. Have the Frog team upload data to me. We would integrate with CRMs, whatever we need to do. And that's also one thing we do at Fraud Deflect. We have tons of integrations. And so my rule, if you're going to work in this community, like if you want a merchant to do something, that's already a bad idea. It's going to take time. So you want fast implementation, fast adoption, fast time to money. So, think about these kind of things depending on what you do, especially if it's software, because, if there's hurdles in the way, it's going to slow you down. Make it super easy for your client to use your product.
And then, Scott, ideally, who is a client for you? If those in our community that are identifying with the words that you are saying and say, "Hey, I have that problem," who is identified as a client for you?
Really, anybody that takes credit cards, especially e-commerce online, is great. Like, I really think every merchant should be using this kind of service. It's like our core is we focus around what I like to call collaborating with issuer. So we ingest data from the merchant, from CRMs, et cetera. And then whenever the credit card companies almost get a chargeback, whenever the consumer calls in or presses the button to dispute a transaction, we then provide more information to try to prevent the chargeback in the first place. So if you didn't recognize the descriptor and it said Epic Games, we would push the data forward to the issuer so they could tell you, "Hey, this is the transaction of Fortnite."
Yeah.
So it solves the problem. Right. So basically, if you accept credit cards online, especially, even more to the point, is if you have a chargeback problem, if you're having VAMP problems, Or MasterCard has a new program called the MasterCard Scam Merchant Program. If you're familiar with these things, or if you're not, maybe you should give us a call.
Nice.
Or better yet, as the world works nowadays, go to our website.
Go to the website.
Fraudiflect.com.
And we'll make sure we put a link in the show notes for that. Scott, I so appreciate not only your patience with the tech issue that we had over at SubSummit. Most of the interview was good. We just missed the first 5 minutes of it. And I'm like, oh, crap, I got to get Scott. And then I thought maybe it would be a good opportunity for you to share your message with our community. And it was. You were a gem to be able to share it. And I appreciate you being on the show again today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Nice Guy community, never underestimate the power of nice. Again, special thanks to Scott Adams. All of his information, including access to his website at Fraud Deflect, will be right there in the show notes. Steve O'Brien, go ahead and take us out of here.
Thanks for listening to the SubSummit podcast. If you want to be in the room with the operators building the next era of subscription and commerce, head to SubSummit.com and grab your pass now. Make sure to follow the SubSummit podcast so you don't miss upcoming interviews with the founders, brands, and partners shaping the industry. We'll see you at the crossroads.